Joining me now, attorney David Schoen. He was hired to represent Jeffrey Epstein 9 days before Epstein died. He's also served as one of the President Trump's lawyers for his second impeachment. David, good to see you. You previously praised the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, for, as you called it, seeking transparency in the Epstein case. What is your verdict now that the DOJ says nothing to see here?
I don't really recall praising her for that, but I'm sure I did if you say I did. I think that the thing has been handled clumsily, quite frankly. I think that they jumped the gun. I think they spoke before they knew what they had. I think there's a certain level of hypocrisy from Congressman Khanna's position now. Where was he during the last 4 years? The Biden administration, we know, for sure that they had all of the same records. Remember, Ms. Maxwell was prosecuted by Mr. Comey's daughter and others. They've had access, a lot of people have had access to all of the papers related to Jeffrey Epstein. But I think it was handled clumsily. I don't believe there's a client list. I don't believe Jeffrey Epstein planned to blackmail anyone. I don't believe Jeffrey Epstein was in the employ of the Mossad or any other intelligence agency or any of these crazy Tucker Carlson theories that are going around.
Well, you say that you asked Epstein, frankly, if he had any dirt on President Trump. What did he tell you?
He said absolutely not. It was an important issue to him. This was before I knew President Trump at all, of course. This is 2019. I don't suggest that our conversation was limited just to that.
Sure.
But this was at a time in which it would have behooved Mr. Epstein to give up every wealthy and famous person that he knew in his own defense. And so specifically, I asked him about Donald Trump because, they had been publicly associated in the past, and Trump threw him out of his club years earlier. He said absolutely not, and it was important to him that people not cast aspersions on Donald Trump and others who we spoke about by wrongly associating him with any of his activities. Remember, Jeffrey Epstein ran with a lot of wealthy and famous people whose names, everybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they might appear in an address book doesn't mean that they did anything nefarious with him. He had a photo array, for example, at his home with some of these rich and famous people with different stories for each photo, which I very much enjoyed hearing, quite frankly. For example, a picture of Bill Gates with a dollar bill. I asked, what's that all about? He said he made a bet with Bill Gates. What was he going to bet Bill Gates? So he bet him $1 and he won. Those kinds of things. But that doesn't mean that any of them had anything to do with the women. I would say one last thing I want to say about this, this call for a special prosecutor and so on. There is a cottage industry of lawyers representing victims against Jeffrey Epstein and the Epstein estate. You can be sure that if any of these famous people who haven't been sued already were with these young women, the young women would be able to identify them and the lawyers would have brought a lawsuit against them a long time ago. So if what people are waiting for is some smoking gun that someone famous, Bill Clinton, Bill Gates, and so on, was with these young women, I don't think there's any such list, and he never intended any blackmail.
Well, let me ask you, if everything you say is true and you've laid it out quite precisely, why is none of this believed by the supporters who say, I don't trust the government, I don't trust DOJ, I think there's something there, and those who are elite are getting away with something else?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's because they were told, we're going to release the entire file and there's such and such and such and such. I think that it hadn't been reviewed.
But wait,
frankly.
David, I don't want to, hold on. But when you heard statements like Pam Bondi, for example, saying, I'm reviewing a client list on my desk or otherwise, you heard people talking about client lists and beyond. What did you think? Did you think that there was some reference that you had not heard of or that it was all make-believe?
I didn't think there was a client list. I think what she meant was that she had a file on her desk that she was reviewing. I think their position now is they reviewed the file. There's no smoking gun about blackmail and so on. They also came to the conclusion that he committed suicide. I don't happen to believe that.
Why?
I can't prove it and they can't prove it. I don't believe it for two reasons. Anecdotally, as I say, I met with him 9 days before. I know that during the course of that week, he was giving instructions right up until Friday based on the defense that we had talked about. He gave me another assignment that was forward-looking. But more importantly, Michael Baden, who to me is the top forensic medical examiner in the world, went through an independent medical examination with him just after he died with the assistant New York City medical examiner. And Michael Baden said that medical examiner couldn't come to a conclusion. And he, Michael Baden, has never in the tens of thousands of autopsies he's done seen injuries like Jeffrey Epstein had consistent with suicide. I also have had calls from people who had jail cells nearby. I've seen the layout of the jail cell, that sort of thing. I'm also surprised the Justice Department never investigated, never interviewed me, who had seen him earlier, or other people. Anyway, it's my belief, but I can't prove it, and I don't have a conspiracy theory on who killed him.
Well, a DOJ Inspector General report did cite a combination of negligence and misconduct and jail staff failures that contributed to an environment that led to Epstein's death. But it states the New York Medical Examiner determined that Epstein died from suicide. That DOJ IG report adds the FBI determined Epstein's death was not the result of a criminal act. So I'll see what they might respond to what you've said as well. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Laura.
I want to talk more. Nice to see you too. I want to talk more about this with Scott Jennings, who is a CNN senior political commentator and also host of the Scott Jennings Show on Salem Radio, and Alencia Johnson, former senior advisor to the Biden 2020 campaign. All right, you heard the way that he laid out just now, and of course he has said all the things that I'm sure the DOJ would like people to believe, but it's not sticking for whatever reason. Why is this the political hill that so many are willing to die on? Why is it that there are so many people who say, nope, I don't believe it, I don't trust it?
Well, it was taken as an article of faith for many years that
What was?
that you know that the idea that there's information that we're not seeing as the general public, and people said that, bought into it, and so Donald Trump wins the election. He appoints Pam Bondi, he appoints Dan Bongino, he appoints Kash Patel. These are all people that this same audience has confidence in. We trust their judgment, and I think it's just hard sometimes to believe something for a long time and then be told, you know what we believed is not the case. I think.
Who does that hurt though? If that's the changing view, if the idea is, I don't trust what I've heard right now, does that harm Trump and the Republican Party? Does it harm Trump in particular?
Look, I don't know. I mean, there are certainly people that have legitimate questions about what happened. I mean, I've heard now two lawyers, both your guest tonight and Arthur Aidala, who I was on with Friday night, both raise questions about whether they believe he even committed suicide. So you can see there are actually, in the know people who are still raising legitimate questions about this case. So you can see why the general public would also have those questions. At the same time, if you vote for Donald Trump and you have trust in his judgment and the people he's appointed, at some point you have to trust their judgment. I mean, you put them in charge of this. And I think what Doug said is important to know. The Biden people had this stuff. If there was something incriminating about Trump, it would have come out. And also now the Trump people have this stuff. And if there was something incriminating about, Bill Gates or Bill Clinton, it would certainly have come out. And so I guess at some juncture, if you trust the people that you voted for, you trust the people that you voted for.
Well, let me ask you, I want to play for you as well some of what the supporters this weekend were saying during the Turning Point USA conference. They told CNN this about the Epstein file. Listen to this, Alencia.
I think they're going to maybe give us pieces and maybe not the whole thing and think that that's going to suffice. And I don't think people are going to be quiet about it until they really do it. But who knows if we'll ever know the true story.
Well, I think that if they don't release the Epstein files, whatever J.D. Vance says then is irrelevant, because it's like everybody's going to take it as like a lie because of what Donald Trump did. But I think J.D. Vance wants these files released as well.
And this is the first topic that all of us as Americans, not as Democrats, not as liberals, not as Republicans, are actually lining together and saying we all want the Epstein files. And I said, come on, Donald, give us those files.
Well, Matt, you hear what they're saying, Alencia. Obviously, there's an issue about the trust, about transparency, and about how this might impact the ability to set things straight. You also heard from the daughter-in-law, Lara Trump, who was saying that, suggesting there might be some need to have more transparency. Is the political pressure working to Democrats' advantage?
I think that's what you see Democrats trying to use, right? It's this conversation around trust. The Trump campaign made a really big deal about the Epstein files. J.D. Vance was talking about this on the campaign trail. Pam Bondi was talking about this. They had people walking out of the White House with these binders talking about the Epstein files. And so they were stoking their base around this conversation, around this, big gotcha moment. We're going to show you this list and show you what's in these files. And then all of a sudden did a bait and switch. And Democrats are using this as a moment to say you actually can't trust them to do the thing that they said that they were going to do. And I think
does it risk being backfired on them though, in the sense, to his point, and I've heard others say this very notion, Alencia, that Democrats had it before. Some people have accused Democrats of essentially sort of dangling something as a setup for Republicans or those who are believing this. What do you say?
Look, I actually don't think Democrats are making this as big of a central issue. I think it's one of the big pieces of a broader puzzle, right, about the trust with the Trump campaign. This is not the central issue for Democrats, but it is just a piece of this puzzle as we're going into some special elections, our Virginia gubernatorial race. All of these things to talk about, you can't trust Donald Trump and the Republican Party to do what they say they're going to do. And here's another example of that. Not the central example, but another example.